Today on Capitol Hill, we were presented with the latest embarrassing example of the constant clown show antics of one of the supposed political parties in our country, as House Republicans held a hearing with former special counsel Robert Hur on his investigation of President Biden's handling of classified documents. The Republicans' primary goal was to create sound bites to run on right-wing media, where they aimed to portray President Biden as somehow simultaneously a fragile, elderly invertebrate who can barely tie his shoes, and also a deviously brilliant master criminal.
Joe Biden had 8 million reasons to break the rules, took classified information and shared it with the guy who was writing the book. That's why he did. He knew the rules, but he broke them for $8 million in a book advance.
All I have to do when I'm caught taking home classified materials to say, I'm sorry, Mr. Herbert, but I'm getting old. My memory's not so great.
Biden and Trump should have been treated equally. They weren't, and that is the double standard.
Well, however, as they usually do, Republicans failed. They couldn't sustain the lie because it doesn't make any sense. And when all was said and done, the fact that Biden was never charged came down to one thing.
We did not, however, identify evidence that rose to the level of proof beyond a reasonable doubt. Because the evidence fell short of that standard, I declined to recommend criminal charges against Mr. Biden.
Now, let's not forget that a major part of this hearing was Republicans hoping to keep alive Mr. Hur's gratuitous description of Biden in his report as a sympathetic, well-meaning elderly man with a poor memory and diminished faculties. While having nothing to do with the classified documents, Hur made the claim in his report that during his 5-hour interview, Biden was unable to remember key dates, including when his son Beau died of cancer. Oh, and you better believe the right wing ran with that claim as further proof that Biden is too old to be commander-in-chief. Yeah, except we now have the transcript of the interview right here that shows it was a lie. And even when Hur was called out on it today by Congresswoman Madeleine Dean, he doubled down.
I want to give you a chance, since the transcript is out, to correct the record on an important point. Very sadly, your report on page 208 says that Mr. Biden couldn't come up with the date, the year of his son Beau Biden's death, when in fact in the transcript it shows that you asked him the month. And do you know what he said, Mr. Hur? He said, oh God, May 30th. Would you like to correct the record? His memory was pretty firm on the month and the day.
Congresswoman, I don't believe that's correct with respect to the transcript.
Oh, well, Mr. Hur, we have the transcript, too. And here it is, right here on page 82 and 83 of the transcript, okay? It seems that it was Biden who brought up his son's death on his own when discussing where he kept papers related to what he was working on after leaving office. And then Biden says the following. Okay, remember, in this time frame, my son is either been deployed or is dying. And so it was. And by the way, there were still a lot of people at the time when I got out of the Senate that were encouraging me to run in this period, except the president. Now, I'm not, it's a mean thing to say. He just thought Hillary had a better shot of winning the presidency than I did. And so I hadn't at this point. Even though I'm at Penn, I hadn't walked away from the idea that I may run for office again. But if I ran again, I'd be running for president. And so what was happening, though, what month did Beau die? Oh, God, May 30th. Then his aides chime in right away, tossing out a year. Cotton, 2015. Unidentified male speaker, 2015. Biden, was it 2015 he had died? Unidentified male speaker. It was May of 2015. Biden, it was 2015. Now, that hardly sounds like a man of diminished faculties. It sounds like a conversation. And in fact, when it came to Biden's memory, Hur actually complimented him during the interview, even though that never came up in the report.
You said to President Biden, you appear to have a photographic understanding and recall of the House. Did you say that to President Biden?
Those words do appear on page 47 of the transcript.
Photographic is what you said. Is that right?
That word does appear on page 47 of the transcript.
Never appeared in your report, though. Is that correct? The word photographic?
That does not appear in my report.
You see, funny how that happened, right? That's not to say, of course, that Biden never makes a gaffe when he's speaking. We all know that he does, but that is nothing new. And in fact, Democrats pointed out during the hearing that if Republicans were so concerned about a leading candidate's memory, they might want to look to their own party candidate. The hypocrisy doesn't stop there. Congressman Jim Jordan, a man who broke the law by defying a congressional subpoena, dramatically feigned outrage about the mishandling of classified documents.
Mr. Hur produced a 345-page report, but in the end, it boils down to a few key facts. Joe Biden kept classified information. Joe Biden failed to properly secure classified information. And Joe Biden shared classified information with people he wasn't supposed to. Joe Biden broke the law.
Hey, Jim, if you think it's a crime for Biden to have had these classified documents, some of which were actually personal diaries that he kept at his home, why don't you think it's a crime for Donald Trump to have classified documents, some classified at the highest level, including on our nuclear programs, stashed in one of his bathrooms at Mar-a-Lago? And unlike in Biden's case, there is more than enough evidence against Trump that rises to the level of proof beyond a reasonable doubt. Adding to the mountain of evidence is former Mar-a-Lago employee Brian Butler, who CNN is identifying as Trump Employee 5 in the special counsel's indictment, something NBC News has not independently confirmed. Among the events and conversations Butler claims to have told investigators about is how he unknowingly helped Trump's co-defendant, Walt Nauta, move boxes that held classified materials, as well as overhearing Australian billionaire Anthony Pratt repeat classified information after meeting with Trump.
He finishes his meeting with the former president, gets in the car, and his chief of staff says, "How did the meeting go?" Pratt, without saying, just says, "He told me," and it would be, U.S. military, classified information of what he told him about Russian submarines and U.S. submarines. And that's really all I remember hearing. And I went, what? I'm thinking this. I'm in the car. I'm like, did I just hear that?
Now, as a reminder, when that news broke last year about Trump's alleged disclosure of classified information to the Australian billionaire, Trump denied it, calling it fake news that he shared such information with the, quote, red-haired weirdo from Australia. And as you'd expect, even with this latest corroboration from this former Mar-a-Lago employee, the Republicans remain silent on Trump's alleged crimes. Joining me now is Congresswoman Madeleine Dean, who, as you saw, participated in today's hearing as a member of the House Judiciary Committee. Congresswoman, I have to go back and focus in on the what looks like a lie, that President Biden could not remember the thing he talks about all the time, which is the tragedy of his son's death.
Yes.
Talk about that just for a moment and how that felt in the room to have him really not want to admit that he made that up.
Well, I have to tell you, when I read the report initially, when it was released and we read the report and then we read reporting on the report, remember the report starts with this one sentence: "We conclude that no criminal charges are warranted in this matter."
Yeah.
That really could have been the summation of the report.
Yep.
But he goes on to say that many, many times. But we said initially it appeared to me gratuitous that he would throw in this information or his own reading of the president's memory. I'm not sure his expertise in that.
Right.
And I found it particularly irksome and indecent that he would quiz the president on the death of his son, Beau Biden, from brain cancer.
Yeah.
Are you kidding me? A veteran and a public servant. And so when the transcript hit today, we took a look to say, did Biden really not know?
Yeah.
And of course, you read it from page 82.
Yeah.
My God, May the 30th.
Yeah.
So it was so gratuitous. And when they wrote, if you take a look at Special Counsel Hur's report, it's on page 208 that he criticizes his memory, couldn't remember this, this, and this, couldn't remember the year of Beau's death. When they were writing that and finalizing it, wouldn't you think somebody in the room would have said, wait a second, do you remember what he said early on in the transcript? My God, May the 30th. And I said, what a searing, I'm a parent myself. I have not suffered such a horrible loss. Yeah. But what a searing memory.
Absolutely.
Of course he remembered his son's death.
Absolutely. And I mean, and look, I just wrote a book. You go back and forth to the transcripts when you're trying to write based on transcripts. The lucky thing is you have the transcripts. He could have literally just looked. I want to play a back and forth that you had with Mr. Hur. And this was about what he said about Donald Trump. Take a listen.
Unlike the evidence involving Mr. Biden, the allegations set forth in the indictment of Mr. Trump, if proven, would present serious aggravating facts.
Keep going.
Congresswoman, I'm happy to have you read the words in my report.
Well, it's your report, so I think it actually is more fitting that you read those.
Most notably, after being given multiple chances to return classified documents and avoid prosecution, Mr. Trump allegedly did the opposite.
Voila. Because the core of the Republicans' argument today, particularly Jim Jordan, was that Donald Trump and Joe Biden, President Biden and Donald Trump are being treated differently. Yeah. Clearly not.
Tremendous contrast. And Mr. Hur laid out the contrast. That's why I asked him to read
He was reading his own words. Yeah.
And he didn't want me to do that. He would have preferred I did it. He didn't want to use those damning words. But the contrast could not be clearer. We had Mr. Biden who said, come search my house, come search my office. If anything is there, take it, please.
Yeah.
I had no knowledge that I had any of these classified materials. And from the indictment at Mar-a-Lago, just the Mar-a-Lago indictment on these documents, do you remember the circus that was going on, the criminality that was going on, moving the documents, hiding the documents, lying to his own attorney, obstructing the FBI, obstructing justice?